Welcome to episode 3 of the Science of Perfection podcast. Today's article is, Who are the 330 million Vedic gods? The situation is that until recent times, people all over the world understood that gods created our world. Now that seems fantastical to most of us. But the fact is, the foundation of all our beliefs and our sense of reality are things we can't see. And if we look honestly and a little bit closely at modern science, we will see that it is rife with inconsistency and incompleteness. And it can do some things that are useful with diminishing returns, and it does not claim to know truth. So take a listen and see what Vedic science has to offer in the realm of a consistent and complete worldview that can actually guide you to happiness. In today's episode, we will explore the root of the concept of how gods control our world, how Vedic science is not monotheistic or polytheistic, how quantum understanding refutes classical physics, and the next step in quantum understanding of how possibilities become manifest, and the heart of what words mean, what they really mean, that they have an ideal, possible, and impossible meaning, and how fundamental words are to reality, and how the ideal meaning of a word corresponds to a person, and an understanding of space based on form and not physical substance. Oh, and puppets. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Science of Perfection podcast. Join me in exploring a new paradigm, an ancient, modernly applicable philosophy of everything. Life does come with a guidebook. It's called the Vedas, and scholar, scientist, and teacher Ashish Dallela presents its wisdom in an accessible manner. I'm audiobook narrator and yoga student Leslie Howard. In these episodes, I will be narrating articles from the website shabda.co that reveal exciting insights on how the world works, the shortcomings of modern science and religions, and how we can integrate logic, physics, biology, psychology, sociology, and philosophy into a consistent worldview that resolves the concepts of oneness and difference, and gives hope, wisdom, and guidance for understanding our lives and our purpose. Who are the 330 million Vedic gods? Shabda Journal, April 20th, 2026. Gods, words, and conscious experiences. The 330 million Vedic gods are personalities that constitute the ideal meanings of 330 million words, which correspond to 330 million states of conscious being. Words describe our experience loosely, not precisely, but each word has a precise meaning, personified in a deity. And we use that word for our conscious state because it approximates the deity's state better than any other word. Many people ask, why so many gods? The answer is, there are as many unique gods as there are unique words. And there are as many unique words as there are unique conscious states. For example, father and mother are 2 words. Fatherhood and motherhood are also possible states of our consciousness. We enter that state if we become a father or mother and start feeling like one. But we may not be the ideal father or mother And wanting to know how to be the ideal father or mother, we might ask for a parenting guide. If there were no parenting ideals, we would never know how to be the ideal father or mother. Therefore, fatherhood is also personified in Shiva and motherhood in Parvati. If we become father or mother, we are like Shiva or Parvati in the sense that we produced a child. But unless we act ideally, we are not truly Shiva or Parvati. The words father and mother capture both cases. A, they can mean the ideals of Shiva and Parvati. And B, they can mean the non-ideal father or mother. Thus, there is a triad. The word is called Adi Bhautika. The ideal meaning personified in a deity is called Adi Daivika, and the non-ideal meaning experienced as our conscious state is called Adi Atmika. The ideal and the non-ideal are called by the same word due to many similarities between the two. This is quite like even a one-legged man is called a man, due to the many similarities he has with an ideal man. Objections against the 330 million gods. This description will sound strange to those who think that A, reality is material objects, and humans are simply more complex material objects. B, words correspond to material objects, not conscious states. C, humans came out of a chemical soup or descended from sinful ancestors, so there are no ideals. And D, science is defined in terms of object concepts in mathematics and measurements in other sciences, not gods. Each of these beliefs is false. A, theories created from mathematics and measurements are either inconsistent or incomplete, or both, so they cannot be truth. B, material objects cannot produce conscious experience. C, we have no access to reality apart from experiences. So either words correspond to experiences or they are meaningless. And D, if words did not have ideal meanings, everyone would make up their own meanings, and we could not communicate. The ideology that most people use to criticize the Vedic descriptions comes from varied attempts to explain, rationalize, and normalize sins. A, if life is accidental, there can be no morals, so there can be no sins. B, if there are no ideals, we can't be blamed for rejecting them. C, if life is a complex material object, there will be no life after the present one, so there is no need for heaven or hell. D, if we reduce minds to bodies, the evil in us would be explained away as an accident of nature. And E, if we only study material objects, we will not find any sin in them. This tendency to explain, rationalize, and normalize sins is seen even in the monotheistic religions. A, sins were given to us by our ancestors, so we are helpless in sinning. B, sins are forgiven by doing animal and human sacrifices. C, the Creator wants us to globalize the idea of inherited sin and its cancellation to everyone. D, we are permitted even more sins of killing, stealing, and lying while trying to convert those who reject our cancellation of sin. And E, the earth will become a paradise after everyone is converted, as we would not have to face the guilt or shame of sinning. Every philosophy has a psychology. Once we know the personality behind the ideas, we understand why it persists with false ideas, why it castigates true ideas, and why it considers the truth a threat to its survival. to repeatedly attack it based on the falsehoods. The accusation of the Vedic tradition being evil for accepting 330 million gods, which doesn't impact anyone else, falls in the category of inexplicable and bizarre behaviors, until we realize that the existence of gods that reward piety and punish sins disturbs people who have spent centuries trying to explain, justify, and normalize their sins. The monotheistic worldview can especially be summed up as clever intellectual trickery to establish the moral superiority of sin. It is inevitable when every person is a born sinner, having inherited the sins of their ancestors, but doesn't want to work on self-improvement. How do you prove that the sinner is better than the virtuous? Well, you can call their gods evil to distract attention from your sinfulness. But factually, the issue is not the number of gods, because the Vedic texts explain that many gods are created by one god. The real issue is, A, the absence of karma and rebirth, which ensure punishment for sin. B, the depersonalization of reality to remove the guilt and shame of sinning. And C, a theology in which God allows, forgives, and demands sins. To hide their elaborate defense of sin, monotheisms criticize the 330 million gods of the Vedic tradition who exist to uphold morality. Once we know what the real issue is, we can comfortably move forward with understanding how the 330 million gods maintain universal moral order. Ideal, possible, and impossible meanings. Every word has one ideal meaning, some non-ideal meanings, and many impossible meanings. The ideal and non-ideal meanings of words were captured in Platonic philosophy, but the impossible meanings were left out, due to which the non-ideal became infinitely stretchable into the impossible meaning. And as people forgot about the ideal meanings, words essentially lost their meaning. For instance, at present, mothers don't want to be like Parvati, and fathers don't want to be like Shiva. Instead, they introduce their children to sinful activities, inducting the impossible meaning into fatherhood and motherhood. When the ideal and the impossible are forgotten, words become meaningless, as everyone invents and assigns their own meaning to words, and nobody can know what the word actually means. The inability to know what a word means after the ideal and the impossible meanings have been forgotten is called postmodernism. It says, there is no such thing as the true meaning of a word. Everyone makes up their own meaning. There is no ideal, and no meaning can truly be excluded from a word as impossible. Thus, communication is impossible. This is the inevitable consequence of rejecting the triad of ideal, possible, impossible. The end of communication is the end of language, which is the end of civilization. Factually, civilization requires the triad of ideal, possible, impossible. In this triad, the ideal is personified in a deity. Some part of that ideal may become our state of consciousness, and the word straddles both worlds, our state and the ideal state, so it can be used to communicate both without equating them. When the Vedic tradition talks about 330 million gods, it is talking about words and their ideal meanings. 330 million is the size of the conscious vocabulary, the number of words in a complete dictionary, based on which we can precisely and concisely communicate our conscious experiences to a listener. There is no civilization without language. There can be a truncated civilization with fewer words, which will also come with a truncated set of experiences. But a complete civilization requires a complete vocabulary, an encompassing set of ideals, and a comprehensive understanding of conscious experiences. That is what the 330 million gods are. Each god embodies an ideal meaning of one word. So we are not left guessing what the word actually means, and descend into chaos by infinitely stretching the meaning of the word from the ideal into the impossible. Without words and gods, we descend into meaninglessness. The creation of the inverted tree space. The Vedic texts describe that all words expand out of a supreme person, the primordial consciousness, as an inverted tree. The trunks, branches, twigs, leaves, and fruits of this tree become the possibilities of conscious experience and are called the space of the universe. The locations within this space are the words. Presence at a location in the universe means having the experience represented by the word, and going outside the universe means having an experience that cannot be captured in these words. The general principle is that the words are opposites, hot and cold, solid and liquid, heavy and light, bitter and sweet. But something beyond the world is either none of the opposites or both opposites at once. The world of opposites is called duality, and the world beyond these opposites is called non-duality. I call this space of words a semantic space to distinguish it from the physical space used in modern science. The locations in a physical space are described through numbers, and those in a semantic space are described through words. A physical space is like a box, and a semantic space is like an inverted tree. Material objects move in a physical space, and a spiritual soul moves in a semantic space. The trajectory of object motion is described using numbers, and the trajectory of life history is described using words. All of modern science is about object motion in physical space, and all of Vedic science is about soul motion in semantic space. The semantic space is also called kshetra, the field, and the soul is also called kshetrajna, the knower of the field. The knower knows the field by moving to different locations. The space is called an inverted tree because there are fundamental and derived words and conscious states. For example, vision is a fundamental word. Color is derived from vision. Yellow is derived from color, while mustard, chrome, and beige are shades derived from yellow. There are literally infinite kinds of beige. Therefore, in theory, the tree of conscious experiences can expand infinitely. However, beyond a certain point, we cannot distinguish between minuscule variations between different shades of beige. Hence, the inverted tree is finite, not infinite. The most fundamental word in this tree is I. If there is no I, there will be no experience, and there will be no requirement for words to describe them. Therefore, I is the root of languages, dictionaries, words, experiences, conscious states, and the world. The birds hopping on the inverted tree. The soul moving in the material space is analogized to a bird sitting on some branch of the tree. As the bird hops to another branch, it gets a different state of consciousness, experience, or being, and that is called the transmigration of the soul. The transmigration occurs at every moment because our state of consciousness changes every moment. The bird is the I, and the branch is the state of the I. Their association is expressed as I am X, where X is the branch on which the bird is currently sitting. The X can be divided into 6 categories: will, cognition, conation, emotion, relation, and intention. Since that gets very complicated, I will just give the example of relations. For instance, X can be father, mother, brother, sister, employee, employer, teacher, or student. The same person can be many of these, but not at once. The I hops from being a father to a brother to a teacher to an employee one by one, and becomes one of those one by one, like a bird hopping from one branch of the tree to another. If one bird sits on a branch of a tree, it is not necessarily the only bird sitting on that branch. Other birds may also sit on the same branch. This is why there can be more than one father, mother, brother, sister, employee, employer, teacher, or student. To contrast this to the physical idea of space in physics, no two particles can be in the same state or at the same location, because being in the same state or location means they are the same particle. Hence, physical space creates problems of consciousness. How can there be many fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, employees, employers, teachers, or students? Or how can one person be father, brother, employee, and teacher when each thing can only be one thing? Classical and quantum ideas of motion. This problem is called non-locality in quantum mechanics. One bird can sit on many branches, potential conscious states, one by one, and can jump from one branch to another instantaneously. Likewise, many birds could be sitting on the same branch, one conscious state, without encumbering other birds. These things are impossible in classical mechanics because two things cannot be in the same place. One thing cannot be in more than one place, and going from one place to another requires a finite time. Quantum mechanics breaks all the fundamental ideas of a thing and a place found in classical mechanics. To solve these problems, we have to discard the physical idea of space and accept the semantic idea. A branch is the state of consciousness, and it can be shared. So two persons can be in the same state. This is also necessary for empathy and understanding. If you and I can't be in the same cognitive or emotional state, we cannot communicate. The possibility of two things being in the exact same state is impossible for objects and essential for persons. Similarly, one person can change their conscious state instantly, without a finite delay. For instance, I can think of my home at one moment and of my workplace at the very next moment. With a change in thought, my awareness moves from my home to my office instantly. It is impossible for classical physical objects to move instantly across great distances, constrained by the so-called law of the finite speed of light. But such movements happen for every consciousness. The finite speed of light is about when I am forced to change my conscious state by someone else, not about when I am willing to change my conscious state on my own. The time taken in change is the result of my unwillingness to change and my resistance against the change forced upon me. It can arise due to apprehension, unpreparedness, or reluctance, and it is called inertia in science. However, inertia is not a law of nature. Everyone is not unwilling, unprepared, apprehensive, reluctant, or resistant toward the change. That is because inertia is also a result of will, the unwillingness and resistance to change. For example, when we move our hands up or down, we are forcing many living cells, alive due to the presence of souls, to change. The hand doesn't move instantly because the will of the souls resists it. That will is coerced by our will during movement, which slows down hand movement. But we can move our thoughts instantly because they are our thoughts, not someone else's. For example, we easily accept ideas arising in our minds as true, but resist the acceptance of ideas coming from others. That is due to the defiance of the soul unwilling to be moved by anyone else's thoughts or words, whereas the ideas coming from one's own mind are not so resisted because they are not seen as coerced change. Therefore, Inertia is resistance to will, and force is counter to that resistance. It is not a law of nature because if will is accepted, there is no resistance, so there is no need to counter it. Of course, that doesn't mean we always surrender our will. Rather, we surrender to good will and resist evil will. We can also force evil will to surrender to good will. When there is no evil will, there is neither inertia nor force. Goodwill is that which brings the greatest collective good, and evil will is that which narrows or hurts that good to bring short-lived individual good. The so-called European Enlightenment separated the questions of inertia and force from the questions of good and evil. And we got the separation of science and religion. But they are not separate subjects. Those who separated them did not know that inertia and force are also will. Space like a box versus space like a tree. Classical mechanics is about body motion, and quantum mechanics is about soul motion. Accordingly, there are two different ideas of space, physical and semantic. Factually, there is no such thing as body motion. There is only soul motion, and the effect of one soul motion on other souls. Accordingly, there is no such thing as physical space. There is only semantic space. But a sense of proximity and distance is created due to soul interaction, which we call physical space. For instance, sometimes we feel lonely in a crowd. Our consciousness withdraws and the world is cut off. If we are absorbed in our thoughts, we don't realize the presence of others around us because our consciousness is not interacting with them. Conversely, if we are always interacting, we don't experience distance, even as others might claim that there is a great distance because they are not interacting with others in the way that we are. Think of a physical line as a human chain comprising some individuals, A, B, C, D, with each person holding the hands of the adjacent person. Now imagine that each person has more than two hands, and they can hold hands with a non-adjacent person. For instance, if B holds hands with A, C, and D, each of them is equidistant from B. But from A's perspective, unaware of B holding hands with D, B is closer to C than D. The physical idea of space rests on an assumption. Space is inactive points arranged in a fixed order like humans standing in a straight line, with each human only holding hands with one human each on the left and the right. But what if that assumption is false? What if space comprises persons that can hold hands not just with predetermined persons, but with whomever they want? If a person holds hands with other persons for longer or shorter durations, space will neither be inactive nor fixed. In fact, the word distance would itself lose meaning because it is no longer fixed but continuously evolving. This is the quantum idea of space. Not a fixed set of infinitesimal points arranged in a fixed order, but a collection of finite entities that create space through stronger or weaker interactions among themselves. This quantum space is tree-like. There is a fixed root, longer-lived trunks, shorter-lived branches, even shorter-lived twigs, and very short-lived leaves. The trunks, branches, twigs, and leaves can touch each other, but they have a primary point of attachment. Like a tree sways in the wind, space is not fixed. But like wind doesn't disintegrate the tree, there is always some space. As the tree grows out of a root, the root is at once the complete space, and yet just a part of the expanded tree. These quantum ideas of space, where a quantum just means an individual person, are not possible in classical thinking. Gods are the parts of the inverted tree. The total size of the inverted tree is 330 million, the count of trunks, branches, twigs, leaves, and fruits. When I move into the fatherhood conscious state, I sit on the Shiva branch and call it my identity. I am Father. It can be misinterpreted as I am Shiva, which is what the Advaita misconception produces. The problem is that I am not an ideal, complete, and original father, whereas Shiva is all of them. Hence, the correct statement is, I am a non-ideal and non-original father of some child or children for a short duration of time. With this, I am Father does not produce the misconception of I am Shiva. Similarly, when I'm angry, I am on the Rudra branch. When I am lusty, I am on the Kamadeva branch. When I sing, I am on the Gandharva branch. When I'm earning, I am on the Kubera branch. When I create novelty, I am on the Brahma branch. When I'm providing, I am on the Indra branch. When I give money in charity, I am on the Lakshmi branch. While teaching the truth, I am on the Vishnu branch. Simply by changing my conscious state, I acquire the traits of some of the 330 million gods. In one sense, all those states are possibilities within me. Therefore, all the 330 million gods are inside me. But in another sense, I don't possess the ability to be the ideal of everything. Therefore, all the 330 million gods are outside me. If I worship one of these 330 million gods, I can come closer to their ideal, after which I could live close to them. But unless I become as ideal as they are, I cannot become them. We know about hierarchical postal addresses: country, city, locality, street, and house. If we move to a different country, city, locality, street, or house, we don't become these places, although each country, city, locality, street, or house gives a different vibe. And while moving through these places, we get the same vibe. Conscious states are also hierarchical, and the world is the spread of conscious states. Vedic cosmology talks about different places of living, each offering a different vibe. Each of these places is centered on one of the 330 million gods, embodying the ideal vibe of that place. And those living with them approximate their conscious state. As conscious states are hierarchical, gods are hierarchical. Our word-meaning dictionaries are created hierarchically based on letter similarities. But imagine a dictionary based on meaning similarity. If we looked up the word love in such a dictionary, we would find the synonyms of love: adoring, cherishing, doting, amour, and affection on the same page. But the antonyms of love, detesting, loathing, abhorring, despising, and hating, would be on a far-off page. This type of dictionary is a semantic space. The words in it are like the locations in the universe offering different experiences. And those experiences are the conscious states of 330 million gods. When we are in a state loosely described by a word, we are in a conscious state similar to the 330 million gods. But if we are in a state antithetical to the state of some god, we are in a conscious state far from them. The creation of words and their powers. Each word has a power, which is originally the power of the Supreme Person, but it also becomes the power of the person who enters that state. That power can be used upon others, and the power controls the person who enters a certain state of consciousness and tries to use that power. For example, the words love and hate have different powers, which can be used upon others, and the power controls the person who enters the state of love or hate. The person-power pair is called Purusha and Shakti. The masculine user of power and the feminine power control each other, and through their union, the I, entering a state of being, Their children, like those of a male and female, are created as effects. Thus, the 330 million gods are couples, male and female, who control each other, and their children are their effects on the world. For example, Surya and Savita are one such couple. Surya is Purusha and Savita is Shakti, and their children are their effects, the heat each person feels and the light each person sees while standing under the sun. Our bodies comprise heat and light, so we are partially the children of Surya and Savita. Heat and light are words. Our body comprises these words. The feeling of heat and the seeing of light are meanings created by the word, which become our state of consciousness. Hence, Surya and Savita are not just giving us our bodies, but also controlling our state of consciousness. The 330 million gods are creators, controllers, and enjoyers of the world. For instance, Surya creates heat and light through Savita. He controls us through heat and light, and he enjoys creating and controlling. Surya is not the supreme person, but he is an important controller because we could not live without heat and light. Similarly, we cannot live without rain and wind. We need the earth to produce food and a house to protect ourselves from heat, rain, and wind. We are totally dependent, even for our survival, on many of these gods. And by varying the supply of heat, rain, wind, and food, they control our lives. The philosophy of word and meaning. Everyone knows that we communicate our experiences through words. When others hear our words, they may have the same experiences as us. For example, if I talk about my grief to someone, they may feel aggrieved. In that process, I have moved them to the grief branch from wherever they were earlier. They may not want to stay there. Who wants to be aggrieved? And they can stop listening to me. But insofar as they listen, understand, and empathize, my state of grief becomes their state of grief. Thus, we affect a private state from another private state through a public reality, words. This private-public difference is also the mind-body difference and the meaning-word difference. My grief is my private reality. The words I use to express grief are the public reality, and the effect they have on others by moving them to the grief branch is the effect of me using the public reality to change their private reality. The mind-body interaction is therefore the meaning-word interaction. Mind and body are neither one thing nor separate things, nor merely a human phenomenon, nor even a minor problem. Everything depends on mind-body interaction, because when we observe the world, some public reality becomes a private conscious state. So not knowing how that happens entails not knowing anything else. We talked about how a word has ideal, possible, and impossible meanings. Of these, the word is itself the impossible meaning, which means that a word indicates what the meaning is not what it is. For example, let's say we use the word human for ourselves. Each of us is quite different, so how can we put everyone in the same category? There are two answers to this question. First, we compare ourselves to an ideal human and find many similarities. Second, we contrast ourselves with animals, fish, trees, birds, and reptiles and find many differences. In the former case, the word human tells us what we are, and in the latter case, it tells us what we are not. In case we don't know the ideal human, contrasts only give us a negative understanding of humanity, but it is better than not knowing anything. We still have to further qualify the word with additional words to make it more precise. For instance, If we can qualify the word human by other words like good and moral, or sick and perverse, we will narrow the possible persons, although we would still not identify a specific individual among all the possible individuals. If we don't know the ideals, words work by the method of elimination. If nothing has been said, anything is possible. But if something is said, some of those possibilities are eliminated, and we get a better idea of what is being communicated. When more is said, even more possibilities are eliminated, and we get an even better understanding of what is being communicated. When nothing is said, consciousness is diffused to an infinite space of possibilities. But if something is said, consciousness contracts to fewer possibilities. If more and more is said, consciousness gets focused and we get the precise meaning. Of course, if we know the ideal, words work as the method of selection rather than elimination. Factually, the same word can be used as a name and a meaning. The name is the ideal individual, and the meaning can be a class of non-ideal instances of that class or their experience. Thus, Agni, fire, can refer to a god, Adi Daivika, an observable reality, Adi Bhautika, and a personal state, Adhyatmika. The sun, the god of the sun, and the personal experience of sun are all called Surya. Likewise, water, the god of water, and the personal experience of water can all be referred to by the same word, Varuna. Positive and negative ideas of reality. Thus, words and meanings are two sides of the same coin, the assertion and negation, the presence and absence, the is and the is not. Our mind and body are just like that. The body is negations and the mind is assertions. For instance, even if there is an emergency, I cannot fly. Even if my life is under threat, I cannot run like a horse. Even if I am attacked, I cannot fight like an elephant or lion. Even if I want to, I cannot see like an eagle. Even if I so desire, I cannot stand for years like a tree. So, my human body is a restriction, disability, negation, and denial of my mind. Likewise, my mind can choose to do one of the many things that my body has not denied, restricted, disabled, or negated. My body is like a closed room. I cannot step outside the walls of the room, but I can walk inside the room. Of course, this room is not physical. It is a constraint on my abilities, or what I cannot do. My mind has to stay within these constraints and do only that which the body has not denied. My choices are quite limited. Similarly, even my mind is a constraint, disability, restriction, negation, and denial on the soul. My mind cannot understand, enjoy, or observe everything. I cannot believe all that others believe. I cannot value all that others value. And I cannot love all that others love. Hence, just as the body constrains the mind, similarly, the mind constrains the soul. Our material existence is like a prison with concentric walls. The body is the outer walls, and the mind is the inner walls. Yoga texts describe 5 such concentric circles of prison walls, called Annamaya, outermost, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya, innermost. The outermost wall is pure negation. The inner walls are part negation and assertion. And the soul inside the walls is pure assertion. The soul is pure isness, while the body is pure notness. The isness is called Brahman, and the notness is called Maya. And the world is created when these two combine. The Brahman is like a light bulb, and Maya is like the lampshade covering the light bulb, which distorts and diffuses the light. Of course, we think that the lampshade makes the lamp attractive, but once the bulb is switched off, the lampshade ceases to be attractive. The problem in material life is that the isness identifies with the notness. The bulb thinks it is the lampshade, so it accepts all the diffusion and distortion as its own property, and all the limitations set by the lampshade as its limitations. Members of the cosmic government. Most people at present have grown up on an unhealthy dose of freedom. You can do whatever you want to do. You can be whatever you want to be. Really? Did you look at yourself in the mirror? Because if you did, you would know that you cannot fly like a bird, swim like a fish, fight like an animal, crawl like a reptile, or stand like a tree. Everyone cannot become a musician, artist, poet, dancer, actor, footballer, boxer, or cricketer. The reality is that we are highly constrained by our bodies and minds, and by the environment that we were born into and exposed to. Everyone doesn't get the same kind of health, wealth, and opportunities. Everyone is constrained in different ways and free in other ways. The question is, who puts freedom under constraint? Who confines the soul into a concentric walled prison? The answer is the 330 million gods. They put the soul into different kinds of mind-body cells. They can move the souls from one mind-body cell to another, and they can make each mind-body cell more or less comfortable or uncomfortable. While moving from one cell to another, a prisoner may think that his life is improving, if he doesn't realize that he is still inside the prison. And while movement from one cell to another can factually feel better, it is not freedom from the prison walls themselves. The 330 million gods are themselves in a prison beyond our prison. Just as our mind-body prison has many concentric walls controlled by some of the gods, similarly, even these gods are in a mind-body prison with many concentric walls controlled by other gods. Thus, Vedic cosmology describes these successive prisons as 7 levels of loka: Bhu, Bhuvar, Svarga, Jana, Tapa, Mahar, and Satya. Even the residents of Satya Loka, which includes the creator of the material world, Brahma, are not completely free. Even their mind-body cells are controlled by the Supreme Person beyond all these prisons. The situation is just like a government hierarchy. The head of the state controls the ministers, who instruct their bureaucrats, who manage their departments, until we come to the lowermost employee, who is directly or indirectly managed by the entire hierarchy going back to the head of the state. The difference between a cosmic and ordinary government is that we don't see the levels of supervisors of the cosmic government, because the ordinary government controls us from the outside, while the cosmic government controls us from the inside. The Vedic tradition is introspective and meditative, and all introspective and meditative traditions have come out of it. That is because the real causes of everything we see externally are deep within. For example, good or bad experiences in the present life are caused by our history of choices, which exists within us, but whose effects are seen externally. Thus, there are 2 ideas of science: the modern idea that looks for causes externally, and the Vedic idea that looks for causes internally. The modern idea seeks to fix problems externally, and the Vedic idea tries to fix them internally. The modern idea fails because the problems and their solutions are internal. We don't see the cosmic government acting on us because it is acting from the inside, not the outside. How the gods micromanage our lives. To understand internal action, we can recall that our experiences arise due to the soul moving in a semantic space called the kshetrajna, the soul in the kshetra, the semantic space. If the soul were free, any soul could move to any part of the experiential space. But if the soul is controlled, it can either not move to certain parts of the space, or it will be forced to move to certain parts by some controller. The power used for controlling the soul's motion is called prana, or life force. At the time of death, the soul is forcibly carried from one body to another by prana. But this forced motion occurs not just at the time of death. It happens at every moment in life, because each soul's prana is controlled by the gods. Our body, senses, mind, and intellect are collections of infinite potentials, one of which is activated at a time. In quantum mechanics, these potentials are called eigenstates, and their activation is called a collapse. Physicists don't know how collapse happens, because their idea of change is that some force must act on a body to change its state. But for that force to act, some potential must be activated to create a force, and nobody knows how to activate a potential. John von Neumann gave a solution in which some consciousness activates a potential, but nobody knows what consciousness is. The force causing the activation of a potential is prana. It can be our prana, but mostly it is the prana of the gods. Thus, there are two ideas of force, external and internal. The modern scientific idea of force is external. We should see who or what exerts that force, and it is called mechanical force. But the Vedic idea of force is internal. We need not see who or what exerts that force, and it is called life force. Mechanical force acts on a body, and life force acts on a soul. Mechanical force moves a body in physical space, and life force moves the soul in semantic space. Mechanical force is the generalization of bodies pushing or pulling each other, and life force is the generalization of souls pulling or pushing each other. To give an example, think of sunlight. Modern science says the sun emits photons, which travel in physical space and enter our bodies to create the experience of heat and light. But the Vedic science says that Savita is Surya's life force, through which Surya moves the soul to a state of seeing light and feeling heat. So it is true that the sun exerts an influence on us. But is that influence a mechanical force or a life force? Does that force act on the body or the soul? Is the force moving in physical or semantic space? The problem is that if the sun emitted photons, it would still require some consciousness to activate the potential before the photon could be emitted. So the photon explanation requires two causes: A, a life force to activate a potential, and B, a mechanical force of the photon to cause heat and light. However, the life force explanation doesn't require the second cause, as the first suffices. If we apply Occam's razor, don't multiply causes beyond necessity, the life force explanation wins. Cosmic puppeteers and their puppets. There are many examples of action at a distance without any force. For instance, we feel the stare of a person standing behind us, even as there is no mechanical force being exerted. We become peaceful sitting close to a calm person, and we become agitated sitting close to an angry person. When a family member yawns, we typically yawn. The life force of those with whom we are intimate affects us more than others. But if a stranger yawns, we don't yawn. Even psychopaths don't yawn upon seeing others yawning because they are not intimate with anyone, and everyone is a stranger to them. We cannot find a traveling mechanical force to explain these phenomena because they are caused by the life force. The contrast between mechanical and life force can be explained through the example of puppets and puppeteers. A puppeteer controls the puppets through strings, but the audience only sees the puppets. Mechanical forces are based on one puppet pushing or pulling the other puppet. Modern science claims that each puppet has some inherent physical properties, for example, mass or charge, that exert a force on the same properties in the other puppet. But this idea is classical physics. Quantum physics shows that all puppets are in stationary states unless some unknown agency moves them to another state. That force is the puppeteer pulling or pushing the strings on the puppets, after which the puppets seem to push or pull each other, when the actual mover is the puppeteer. Modern science works on the premise that puppets are pushing and pulling each other, whereas Vedic science attributes causality to the puppeteer. The prana, or life force, coerces our will. It stops us from going to states we may want to, and forces us into states that we may not want to. This is not the absence of free will, but constraints on it. Each person gets a tiny amount of freedom, the space within their prison cell, to exercise their will. If they use the will correctly, they get a bigger prison cell, where they can exercise greater freedom, and even control over other prison cells, where they can control other prisoners. A higher species of life has greater freedom, and a lower species has lesser freedom. Accordingly, a god is simply a higher species of life that has greater freedom, control, autonomy, power, and influence over other species. Humans have far greater control over their mind, body, and life than animals. A dog has more control over its mind, body, and life than a tree. And a stone has literally no control over its mind, body, and life. As freedom decreases, we get the illusion of determinism, inertness, and objectivity. And as freedom increases, we get the opposite illusion of autonomy, independence, and sovereignty. Both are illusions, because there is always some freedom, neither unlimited freedom nor absolute determinism. Perceiving the gods that control us. Someone can ask, how can we believe in the existence of things we do not perceive? This ideology is anti-science. Well, ask yourself, do you perceive space or time? Have you seen a field of gravitational or electromagnetic force? Do you have any idea about what mass or charge is? The answer to all these questions is no. We don't perceive the causes, but we perceive their effects. Then we try to explain these effects using postulates about what might have caused them. If we consistently and completely explain all the effects, the postulates are considered true, and the theory that uses them is proven. Therefore, anyone who demands to see the cause as a precondition for something to be science doesn't know what science actually is. Space, time, force, matter, and law are imperceivable conceptual constructs, whose truth is known by their power to predict and explain observations, not by our perceiving them. Does that mean we can never perceive the causes? We can, but that too requires semantics. Let's take the example of words again. We hear the words, but the cause of those words is an author. Can we know the author from the words? It's not possible in a physical theory because the author does not travel with the words. But it is possible in a semantic theory where the author's personality is present in the words, although uncovering and seeing that personality in the words is not easily possible for everyone. To see this personality, we need three things. A, read a lot of words. B, understand the meanings. And C, have an appreciation for the author. These are cyclically dependent on each other because we will not read a lot unless we understand the meanings, and we will not understand unless we appreciate the author. To understand someone, we have to put ourselves into the same conscious state as they are. And if that state is liked, the person in whose state we are trying to be is also appreciated. Now, when we enter the same conscious state as the other person, we know them by becoming them. This is knowing the person from the inside, not outside. We are being him, not seeing him. Once we know the person from the inside, we know what they are. And then we also know what they are not. Recall that the body is what a person is not, and the mind is what the person is. Thus, after knowing what a person is on the inside, we also see them from the outside. The previously invisible cause now becomes visible. To illustrate this process with an ordinary example, you have probably heard romantic stories of pen pals who write letters to each other, and over time they fall in love with each other through the letters. They form a mental image of each other based on their letters, and if they had been honest with each other, when they meet, they realize that the person is just like the mental image they had of each other. Those who demand to see gods don't realize that seeing can be an illusion. For example, we can see a movie on a screen, but it is an illusion. I can show you a cardboard car, and it is an illusion. For the movie to be a reality, I should be able to change its events. For the car to be a reality, I should be able to drive it to my chosen place. Technology in our control is proof that science works. Anyone can show us a picture of the God, but we will not accept it as that God unless we get the desired outcomes through the picture. Therefore, seeing is an illusion unless we also have control. The gods see and control us, but we do not see or control them. So it is one-way causality from the gods to us. For it to be two-way causality, the gods must submit to our vision and control, which can happen only if they know that we will not abuse the power they put in our hands to control them. There is a protocol even for ordinary people meeting the head of a state. There should be a legitimate purpose. We should pass the background check. We should be appropriately dressed for the occasion. We should be aware of the etiquette during the meeting, and we must undergo a full body scan. We cannot meet an important person without following the protocol. If we are unprepared to follow the protocol, we can look at the pictures of the head of state, but if we call that false idolatry, then we see nothing. Similarly, the gods appear before us only when we become their devotees. Before that, there is the process of reading, understanding, and appreciating called bhakti in the Vedic tradition. Through this process, the deity is seen mentally. But when devotion is established to the point that the god is willing to be seen and controlled, the god is seen face to face. The puppeteer appears before the puppet when the puppet stops resisting the puppeteer and willingly becomes his puppet. Then the puppeteer agrees to become the puppet's puppet. Then the puppet sees the puppeteer. But until that process is perfected, the puppets can be theoretically convinced of the puppeteer's existence, exactly like science proves the truth of a postulate by establishing that it consistently and completely explains all the effects. Monotheistic accusation of polytheism. Anyone who can control someone else's state of consciousness is called an Ishvara in the Vedic tradition, which is loosely translated as God in English. The difference is that monotheisms assume there is only one God, and the Vedic tradition describes 330 million controllers, working under the supervision and control of the Supreme Person, who created all the words and states of consciousness when he created the material universe. Since there is one Supreme Person, the Vedic tradition is not polytheistic. Since there are many subordinate controllers, the Vedic tradition is not monotheistic. Rather, the Supreme Person has the power to experience any conscious state, and he delegates that power to other gods because souls in the material world deeply desire superiority, power, influence, status, and control over others. If they use the power morally, righteously, and judiciously, the Supreme Person permits them. They are not autonomous or independent controllers. They are subordinate to the Supreme Person. In monotheisms, the world is substance, like energy, and things, like objects. The science derived from monotheism says that substance is dividing and aggregating, or things are evolving and moving. But in the Vedic tradition, the world is experience. The science based on the Vedic tradition says the self is changing from one conscious state to another. The monotheistic science postulates impersonal laws, such as the law of gravitation, to explain the working of substance and things. Meanwhile, the Vedic science describes how our conscious state is controlled by 330 million pairs of Purusha and Shakti. Monotheisms accusing the Vedic tradition of polytheism would work if they could produce one law for the entire universe. If there is only one God, one book, and one Messiah, then why isn't there only one law? Practical experience shows us that every country, state, department, company, and home has lawmakers making their own laws. Then the judiciary, courts, lawyers, and the bureaucracy of the country, state, department, or company, along with the heads of families, enforce these laws. Therefore, even under a monotheistic worldview, there are millions of people making and enforcing laws, all acting like gods. Monotheism is man-made fiction because A, their God did not give them a law that governs everything. B, the gaps left by their God are filled by millions of men acting as gods. C, nobody even knows all the laws they are supposed to follow. D, they cherry-pick the laws they find convenient to follow. And E, they change the laws that become inconvenient. Monotheism is not truth. It is the hypocrisy of allowing some men to create the laws and force them on others by calling them divine laws. When that fails, the autocratic lawmaker is divided into numerous lawmakers, bureaucrats, and judges. Insofar as these individuals are given high respect, for example, calling them Your Excellency, Your Honor, His Highness, His Lordship, Your Majesty, or Mr. President, people worship ordinary mortals as gods, which is the actual false idolatry. Under the Vedic tradition's hierarchy of controllers, leaders of humanity are lower rungs in the hierarchy of cosmic control. They can be heads of a country, state, department, village, or family working in consonance with cosmic governance. The priests, kings, bureaucrats, judges, and lawyers are neither totally free nor fully bound. They act within the constraints set by the cosmic government and their freedom and control grow if they act in consonance with the cosmic government. If they abuse their limited freedom, the freedom decreases further. The increase and decrease in freedom is the rise and fall in the cosmic hierarchy. You have been listening to an article written by Ashish Dallela, titled, "Who Are the 330 Million Vedic Gods?" from Shabda Journal, April 20th, 2026. The website address is journal.shabda.co/who-r-the-330-million-vedic-gods. If you enjoyed this podcast, there is lots more where this came from at shabda.co. And let us know by leaving a like or a comment, and feel free to share.